like this empire. And it was supposedly super advanced, powerful,
Hmm.
but then it just vanishes. Poof, gone, erased.
Erased. That's a bit dramatic, isn't it?
Well, yeah, that's kind of the point of this whole deep dive. We're
Mm.
tackling this whole enigma that is Tortaria.
Hmm.
Plus, just to make things even more interesting, this whole lost civilization thing is tied to another crazy idea, the mud flood.
Mud clay,
Yeah,
yeah.
imagine cities buried under tons of mud, cataclysmic events, the works, a whole lot of unanswered questions.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Right. And get this. We're talking about a potential empire, right, that stretched from Asia all the way to Russia.
Whoa, hold on. That's huge. Like geographically huge.
Exactly. A landmass so vast it boggles the mind. Like, how could something that massive just disappear?
All right, so you've got my attention. What have we got on this Tartaria
Well,
place?
funny thing is, the name Tartary does actually pop up on these old maps.
Which makes sense, I mean, if it was supposedly this massive empire.
Right. But the thing is, what that name actually means in the real history of the place, that's where it gets complicated.
Oh, I bet. So it's not as simple as finding Tartaria written on a map and boom, case closed.
Exactly. Picture this. You're an 18th century map maker,
Okay, I'm picturing it.
and you're dealing with this massive area, basically unknown, trying to make sense of it all. It wasn't always clear-cut what was an actual empire, a cultural group, or just a name for a region. It's all jumbled.
Makes sense. It's like trying to draw a map of the internet, right? Things change so fast, it's almost impossible to keep up.
Right. And that just shows how much our understanding of history changes as time goes on. We're always learning new things.
Absolutely. History's not as set in stone as some people might think.
Totally. But, okay, here's where it gets even wilder. Some people claim that Tartaria was so advanced, it had technology we wouldn't even dream of for centuries.
Like what? Give me an example.
Like free energy. They had free energy, supposedly. Wireless communication, centuries before Marconi.
Hold up. That sounds a little out there, even for me.
Right. I know. But if it were true, it would totally rewrite our understanding of, well, everything. Technological progress, history, everything.
All right, I'll bite. What's the evidence? What makes people think Tartaria was this technological utopia?
So some people point to these old, intricate buildings that have really unique energy systems. They say these are proof of lost Tartarian technology.
Okay, I've seen pictures of these buildings. They are pretty amazing. But couldn't those systems just be, advanced for their time, but not necessarily alien tech?
That's the thing, right? It's hard to tell. A lot of it comes down to interpretation.
Mm.
What some people see as proof of hyper-advanced technology, others might just see as, like you said, impressive, but ultimately explainable with the knowledge of the time.
Right, like we can't just jump to conclusions based on a few pictures and some bold claims. What about hard evidence? Documents, artifacts, that kind of thing.
Speaking of sources and connections, some people bring up the Republic of Tatarstan, the place of the flag. They say it's a link
Mm.
to this lost empire.
Tatterstam, sure. Interesting connection. But isn't that more of a linguistic and cultural link than, like, a direct lineage?
That's the debate, right?
Mm.
There are definitely similarities in language and culture between Tatarstan and the region that used to be called Tartary. But whether or not it's a direct line from some glorious lost empire is another question entirely.
It's easy to get caught up in the romance of it all, but we have to be careful not to let wishful thinking cloud our judgment.
Absolutely. And speaking of looking at the bigger picture, let's talk about maps for a second.
Okay, maps. Always a good place to start.
So you look at maps from the 18th century, right? Karturi is there, front and center, prominent as can be, but then boom, by the 19th century, it's gone, vanished, often with China expanding into that space. What happened?
Well, if you think about it, map making was changing drastically during that time. In the 18th and 19th centuries, Europeans were exploring more of Asia, learning more about its geography, its people, its politics. Naturally, their maps had to change to reflect this new knowledge.
So as they learned more, Tartaria just sort of faded away.
In a way, yes. It wasn't necessarily a deliberate erasure. It's more like they realized Tartaria, as they understood it, wasn't a single unified entity. Plus, political boundaries were constantly in flux. What might have been labeled Tartaria one year could be divided up and renamed a few years later. It's less about a hidden history and more about evolving knowledge and shifting political realities.
Makes sense. It's like that saying, the map is not the territory.
Exactly. Maps are just representations, and they're always subject to change based on what we know or think we know at the time.
Right, right. So we've talked about maps, we've talked about lost technology, but we can't forget about perhaps the most dramatic theory of them all, The mud flood.
Ah, yes, the mud flood. Now, that one definitely gets people talking.
Right. It's like something out of a disaster movie. This idea that a massive cataclysmic event, maybe even a global flood, buried Tartaria and all its advanced technology under meters of mud.
Sounds dramatic, but where's the evidence?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Because if there was a flood of that magnitude, wouldn't we see evidence of it?
Exactly. Geologically speaking, a flood that big would leave an undeniable mark. And archaeologically, imagine the layers of sediment, the destroyed settlements. We just don't see it.
So no massive civilization-burying mud flood?
Not likely, no. At least not on the scale that some proponents of the theory propose. It's a fascinating idea, but without solid evidence, it remains just that, an idea.
So here we are at the end of our deep dive into Tartaria. And honestly, I feel like we have more questions than answers.
That's the beauty of history, isn't it? It's not always about finding concrete answers. Sometimes it's more about exploring the possibilities, challenging assumptions, and grappling with the unknown.
True, true. So what started as a deep dive into Tartaria has become this exploration of maps, myths, and how we view the past.
And maybe, just maybe, that's the real lesson here, that our fascination with lost civilizations, with hidden histories, says something about us, about our desire to believe in something greater, something more mysterious than what we see on the surface.
So we want there to be these grand mysteries still waiting to be uncovered.
Exactly, and who knows, maybe there are. But as we've seen with Tartaria, it's important to approach these mysteries with a healthy dose of skepticism, to let the evidence, or lack thereof, guide us, and to remember that sometimes the most fascinating stories are the ones that make us question, rather than the ones that give us easy answers.
I like that, a healthy dose of skepticism.
Uh-huh.
So to our listeners, keep exploring, keep questioning, and who knows what lost worlds you might uncover.